This video is going to give you an example of how to annotate a text. As I'm annotating, you should be also annotating along with me so that you have the same example in your Superman and Me packet. So today we're reading Superman and Me by Sherman Alexie. He's the author of the first novel we'll be reading together as a class. He's one of my favorite writers. I'm really excited to read his book. Let's look at the top. It says, after we read this text, we will relate our 2 year-long essential questions to Alexie's life. As a reminder, those questions are, what does it mean to come of age? If we relate it to Alexie, we'd say, what did it mean for Alexie to come of age? And our other question is, what is the relationship between language and power? So we'll ask for this text, in Alexie's life, what is the relationship between language and power? Everyone, as you're reading, you should be thinking about at least 2 things. Writing questions. It's really helpful to write any questions we have as we read because it's a way to record our thinking, and also it gets us to think about how to answer those questions more. If we actually write them down, we're going to be thinking about how to find the answers to those questions as we read. And then you also want to highlight unknown words. We'll discuss different ways to figure out unknown words throughout the year. For now, we're just going to highlight them. I've also added a challenge here if you feel like you want to push your reading skills and annotation skills further. Everyone copy this challenge prompt down here, and then if you feel like you're ready to take it on, you'll go for it as we're reading. In addition to writing questions and highlighting unknown words, a challenge prompt would be to record any other thoughts or guesses or predictions or ideas that are coming up, and then to also put a star by any essential question topic. So for example, if you notice anything about coming of age coming up in the text, you could put a star by that, or anything about language or power. There's a challenge prompt for you that will also help you when we reflect at the end. All right, let's get started. As I read, I'm going to be annotating. I've got my pen and my highlighter ready, so make sure you're following along. I learned to read with a Superman comic book. Okay, I already have a question that I'm going to add. How did he do that? So let's add that together. How did he do that? Because I've never heard of anyone learning to read with a comic book, so I'm wondering what he means by that. Let's keep going. Simple enough, I suppose. I cannot recall which particular Superman comic book I read, nor can I remember which villain he fought in that issue. I cannot remember the plot, nor the means by which I obtained the comic book. Okay, let's highlight obtained. Not sure what that means, so we can come back to that. What I can remember is this. I was 3 years old. Okay, I'm a little confused here. Does he mean when he learned to read he was 3 years old? Because that would be pretty young. So I'm just going to ask, is this when he learned to read? Is this when he learned to read? Because if so, that seems pretty early. Let's see. What I can remember is this. I was 3 years old. A Spokane Indian. Okay, I'm not sure what this means. So I'm just going to add a note here. What is this? Spokane. We'll keep going. Spokane Indian boy living with his family on the Spokane Indian Reservation. Okay, in eastern Washington state. We were poor by most standards, but one of my parents usually managed to find some minimum wage job or another. There could be a lot of different minimum wage jobs. I'm wondering what kinds, because there are many jobs that could be minimum wage. Which made us middle class by reservation standards. Okay, wait, I'm a little confused. I need to go back and start up at the beginning of the sentence again. We were poor by most standards, but one of my parents usually managed to find some minimum wage job or another, which made us middle class by reservation standards. Oh, so I'm kind of having this thought here that if normally they're considered poor, but on the reservation they're middle class, meaning they have a little more money, then people on the reservation must be really poor if in comparison his family has a little more money. So I'm going to do this challenge prompt part up here, add a thought or a guess, and I'm just going to add reservation must be very poor. And I'll underline very to emphasize it. Very poor. Okay. I had a brother and 3 sisters. We lived on a combination of irregular paychecks, hope, fear, and government surplus food. Okay, let's highlight irregular. I'm not exactly sure what that means, so that's a good thing to note. And then I'm wondering, what does he mean they lived on hope and fear? Because you can't literally live on those things. Like you can't eat or drink them. So I'm going to add, what does he mean by this? As I was reading, I also noticed a few things that had to do with coming of age, language, and power. So I know reading is a big part of coming of age. As you're moving from a child to a teenager and an adult, you become better at reading, which is a really important skill that you need to be an adult. So I'm just going to make a note up here, and I'm just going to put COA for coming of age to remind me that's the thing I noticed. Reading also has to do with language, I guess, so I can put an L here for language, because that's another essential question topic. And then I also noticed something that had to do with power. He's talking about being poor, and I know that oftentimes the more money you have, the more power you have, and so I'm just kind of wondering if his family didn't really have a lot of power. So I'm just going to put a little star here and then a P for power to remind me that I'm noticing this essential question topic coming up. All right. Now I'm going to move over to the comprehension question section, and 1.1, meaning it's the first question in section 1, says paraphrase the underlined text. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is go back and reread what the underlined text says. So I'm just going to read that in my head really quickly. You should read it too. Okay, it's pretty long. I need to figure out how I'm going to paraphrase this, and I want to try to do it in a sentence or less. So I need to figure out what the main thing he's talking about is. Well, he mentions being 3 years old, being Spokane Indian, Washington, being poor, minimum wage jobs. I thought the reservation must be very poor. He had a brother and 3 sisters, lived on a combination of irregular paychecks, hope, fear, and government surplus food. I'm going to make a guess right now. Actually, I highlighted this word and I wasn't totally sure what it meant, but I'm going to take a guess that maybe it means they're only getting paychecks sometimes, because he said his parents usually managed to find a job, which means sometimes they didn't. If you don't have a job, you don't get paychecks. And if it's a minimum wage job, maybe they're not paying you consistently or very much. So I'm just going to take a guess this means don't always have paychecks. So one idea that I'm noticing coming a lot up in these sentences is the idea of being poor, not having a lot of money. He mentioned some other details like having brothers and sisters or living in Washington, but the idea of being poor or not having a lot of money comes up a lot. I'm just going to go through and circle all the times I see it. So poor, minimum wage job, irregular paychecks, meaning maybe they're not getting paid very much. So this idea of being poor is important. He also mentions, I think twice, being a Spokane Indian. This is something that comes up too. And he lives on a reservation, so that comes up a few times. Oh, and then they mention reservation down here too. So probably 2 ideas that are going to be important in my paraphrase are that he's poor and that he grew up on a reservation. So I'm going to go over here, paraphrase the underlined text. I'm going to say, Alexi grew up poor on an Indian reservation. Make sure you get that down too.